Welcome to West Palm Beach City Commission work session. It is February 19th and it's about 10:02 a.m. We're going to start with our first item, and that is the play sidewalk, and we're happy to have Daily to La Jour here with us, and we're excited about this. Sibile, tell us about it.
Hi, Sibile Welter, coordinator for the Art and Public Places program. Just a quick update. It is now called, it has a new title because it was a conceptual working title, so the new title is called Shade Parade.
Shade
You will understand it better as the presentation goes on. As you know, the city commissioned through the Art and Public Places program Daily to La Jours to work on a very challenging location in the downtown. Along with Ana Maria Ponte and I have been working on the idea that this challenging space poses a lot of opportunity. And so Melissa has traveled from Montreal.
Welcome. It's
yes,
a little warmer here, right?
Yeah, yes, and she's very happy about that. The weather's cooperating.
One of my favorite cities, though, Montreal.
We have been working very closely, not only with Daily to La Jours, but as well as other departments in the city and FDOT, as FDOT does own the right-of-way of Quadrille. And we are now at a point where, in order for you to have a more deeper understanding of where this project is going, what is intention, we invited Melissa to come down and present the project to you. So, Melissa, I will give it to you.
Awesome. Welcome, Melissa. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Sibile. Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here for many reasons. And one of them is to present you this exciting project we've been working on for some time now. So Sibile came to us for this commission to create a new temporary public installation. So we're looking at the west sidewalk of Quadrille Boulevard between Clematis and Fern. That was our playground territory. And the way we work is we start on the site. We're very site-specific in our approach. So we traveled here. We not only tried to understand the site, but also the people within the site. So we did a lot of community engagement workshops. One session that was more broad, another one that was more focused, to try to understand people's relationship with Quadrille Boulevard and also their aspiration for the city, what it means to be a pedestrian or someone from West Palm Beach, and we gained a lot of insights, some challenges, some opportunities. The challenges, well, there was, and we kind of knew that one, the lack of purpose of that side of the street feels like a long path to nowhere. And very importantly, the lack of shade. Something so simple was on all on all minds. On top of that, some traffic and safety concerns with the cars about the area. The sidewalk looks very long, and this lack of connectivity with the rest of the Brightline station. Opportunities. It's a blank canvas because nothing's there, so we can do anything. And at the same time, so we've done a project called the Musical Swings that you guys happen to know about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
One of our favorites.
Thank you. The first time we did the Musical Swings, it was in an area very similar to this part of Quadrille Boulevard because it's a transitional space. We're right by Brightline Station. You feel like there's no one, but there's actually a lot of people who pass by. They just don't stop, so you don't see them. But there is potentially a public space that is hiding there. Just if we can find them a reason to slow down a little bit and meet one another. So also this vision of a linear park was interesting to build from. So in sum, what we're trying to do is trying to create a distinct experience for the city with what the city has, and in a way that promotes walking and stimulates connections between people of all ages. This is really close to our heart. We like this idea that people can mingle no matter their backgrounds, no matter to see skaters talk with elderly people makes our day in general, and we've seen it before in projects, and we know it's possible, and for us, that's like the future city. A place that just is welcoming for just about anyone. So, the concept. working from all the challenges, we saw actually opportunities in that particular column, especially with the lack of shade. So seeing how we can transform this disadvantage into something of a magical moment of delight and surprise, working from this need from protection from natural elements. So this need of shade. We've done some research, different ways that people protect themselves from the sun, from the rain. As you can see, you have some wearables. Nature has always been there, but sometimes you try to take a piece of nature and have it follow you because you need to move. Architecture sometimes provides very thin spaces, and that's where you see group formations following shade. And also, and in parallel to that, because we're next to a train station and also where we want to encourage walking. So what are the different ways that we walk? Is it like in more celebratory context where it looks more choreographical, or those courtesy moments where someone will lend a hand to someone else, or those general teamwork efforts where people get together? So this is where I'm getting at. Can the need for shade provide perhaps a new means of transportation that's really distinct and special to West Palm Beach? And this is our shade parade, where we invite people to share the road.
I love that sign.
Thank you. With and maybe a day where there's no more cars, this will look like the sign. So it's a series of sunshades that are suspended on a large railings. This used to be, initially, you'll see in some prototypes, we were thinking of a zip line. It was a cable. Now it's a rail, and it makes even more sense because of the Brightline station right next to it. So these giant umbrellas or parasols are sliding on these railings, and they enable people to move in a way that it's much more fashionable, but also suggest all sorts of social interactions. Because the parasol is very giant, but super easy to move around, and it follows you wherever you take it. You can help someone, sharing it with someone. You can play together, or also lead the way, because it becomes some sort of a Congo line. Conversation starters, this is what we live for. So how this new means of transportation can generate new types of relationships between people, because at some point you're done, so will you be handing it to someone else? It's like holding the door for someone. Would you like my parasol? Or there's a negotiation that happens because there's one rail and many parasols. So when you get to another, you need to swap. So you'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, I want to go this way.
Do they move along this cable?
Yes.
For a certain distance?
It's a rail. Yeah, we're going to see the design very soon.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a way to gather. Like, we've seen crazy weather. And it's a way for people to, hey, wait for me. I'm coming. So this is what they look like. Giant fuchsia parasols along the way. We have 3 segments along quadrille of 100 feet each that we'll be experimenting with. We did this a shadow study that shows that these particular segments are the most in need of shade. And this is to bring you a little bit in our crazy designer mind. At the studio, our team was working on different. So we start from scratch. This does not really exist. So we're trying to see what is the best. Is it a large shade or many tiny ones? We figured out if it was a tiny one, it needed to be so high that we decided to go with one very large one. And then this different scenarios, whether you exchange it. There were, at some point, we had 2 that were in 2 lines, and you could do some high fives. But actually, that's good for people who know each other. But to have people not knowing each other, we quite like them to be on the same rails, because it stimulates a little bit more negotiation, because we're kind of forcing people to bump into one another. So there's a swap, the Congo line that can happen where you're following someone else. And because they're so large, they're just conducive to sharing. So you must have a lot of technical questions. This is where we answer most of them. So this is the shape of the umbrella. It's made out of aluminum, a very thin aluminum sheet that is perforated. only on the sides, just to make it more wind resistant. This is what it looks. So from underneath, it's very like neat. There's not much happening. Everything is pretty much happening on the top, where you can see we're folding it for it to be sturdy. We have a universal joint for the handle, so that it has some give if people are into it. These are all the wonderful considerations when you actually have to do it. Once you've been prototyping with cardboard and having fun in the studio, now it's time to make it happen. So this is what it looks like. You have the universal joint. We also, the different parts of aluminum and the handle. We're still working on the handle, trying to find the perfect soft material, so that it's inviting to grab, but also if you happen to be, I don't know, on a bike, it's you're not going to hurt yourself. This is the perforation pattern. It's a very large umbrella, so you have 4 feet in the middle. Yesterday, 4 feet is actually 2 people side by side that are protected from rain if that's the protection you're seeking. So perforations, we've had so many wonderful conversations with engineers. Are there any engineers in the room? Salute to your practice. Well, yes, perforations reduce wind load. They provide water drainage. And yes, and also for all the non-engineers, they create a really nice shade pattern on the ground. Increased visibility and safety at night. We're integrating a little light. This way, we're using the sun to operate wirelessly. So there's a sun sensor. No. Capteur solaire. There's a solar device that takes the sun. I only have the French expression in my mind right now. But yes, it's work with the sun. And this is all our engineer friends come to the table, and we're currently studying 2 options for the structures. There is one that is more cantilever, and the other one is a full arch. One of them requires less foundations, which might be a significant advantage because we are in public domain, and the underground infrastructure, we're trying to see where are the utilities and where we can go and where we can't go. So these are the structures that we're looking at, and these, I mean, working in West Palm Beach, we had a taste of it with the swings. We need to be hurricane proof. And we're going to be presenting in hurricane season. So initially, the commission is for a temporary artwork, but because of the hurricane constraints, it makes the project quite literally heavy. We're going into foundation work. It's a lot of we're investing a lot in the structural part, especially to hold this shade parade. So it's bringing out a lot of questions about temporary versus permanent. If you have to invest so much to something temporary, that anyways is you kind of have to make it last because it needs to survive a hurricane. We were thinking, is there maybe another model we can look at? You know, when you look at a problem for so long, and okay, so how can we make it lighter? How can we make it lighter, yet it needs to survive a hurricane? At some point, it's like, okay, maybe it stays there, and we just make it robust for it to stay forever. So this is still in conversation with Sibile and the city of West Palm Beach. But I just wanted to raise attention to this idea of perhaps the structure element can have some permanent function and can relive other lives beyond the umbrellas. A very good example is back to our musical swings. This is, you see on the left side of the slide, you have those structures that we have in Montreal in our entertainment district. They were created for all sorts of events, for exhibitions, and mainly exhibitions, and also have markets, food stands that can be quickly put together on these structures. When the space opened, they came to us and said, "Oh, can you do a fantastic, whimsical, delightful event on this strip of land?" And the structures were there, so we felt like we needed to use them. And I'll cut to the chase, but we decided to install musical swings on them. And now the swings are this spring ritual in Montreal where we install them every spring, and they open up the season, kind of the festive season after a very normally long winter. And they just are this joy for people to see. So there is something to work with, where you have one event and then the rest of the year they show photo exhibitions, they become stands to sell beer during festivals and whatnot. You have other examples of multifunctional structures. These big lighting devices in the same area also can suspend all sorts of artwork or show elements. So something to think about. And the technical, so this is where we're at right now on the technical side of it. We're developing the structure and the objects. The structure, we're working with engineers that are licensed in the state of Florida, Celtic Engineering, really wonderful, nice people. The fact that we're working for hurricane season, of course, makes it all very expensive. I'll be very a straight shooter with that. And in terms of permitting, we're working with Sibile, with FDOT, city permitting seems to be going well, and the industrial design of the structure. We're looking at anchoring in foundations, that's for sure. We'll have 6 gliding shade elements. There is speed control by centrifugal brakes that will be enabled, and the handle is the one thing that we're currently designing, and we're working with visually impaired people experts to do that. And that's the technical side. This is how we end a presentation.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Welcome. So, lots of questions. I'll start with kind of price point, which it sounds like we need to determine whether or not this is truly going to be temporary, and I know this is just discussion, but temporary versus more permanent. So that's more rhetorical. The question I have, trees, is there any way to infuse trees into the ultimate design? I mean, because when we talk about permanent, permanent for what? For a decade, permanent for, I think any structure has a shelf life,
Yeah.
And so my question would be, is this an opportunity to, even from the aesthetic standpoint, to infuse, something, but to include trees? Have we thought about that? Have we?
What the strategy would be to include trees to?
Well, I see trees as permanent. So when you say permanent, I appreciate it, and I know what you mean by
Yeah.
that versus the temporary, 6 month, 1 year. The bottom line is even this structure as a permanent structure will have a shelf life. At some point, it will need rehab, it will need change out, it could be a decade from now, whatever it is. I don't see that in a tree, and I think when I think about tree, I think about shade. I think about we get some, all of these benefits.
Just use trees instead of the project.
Have we thought about it?
So,
Go ahead.
we have brought in Ray from Development Services into the conversation about trees. The conversation was actually a little bit different. It was more about the concern of the trees and not encroaching upon their root system and using the trees almost like a good neighbor to the structure. So we had the conversation, but we didn't have the conversation the way you're thinking of it. We can open it up to a larger dialogue, but it was more about how they can work symbiotically together, not.
And we tried to address this with Brightline, because that whole space is so blank. And we really wanted them to have, to be able to get into the Brightline through quadrille, and we looked at what it would take to have more landscaping there and everything. So I don't know that we have the exact answer to your question, but certainly something we could look at.
If I may, right now the trees are fairly young.
Right.
So it's also for sure nature will have a way to to withstand us all and provide shade in the future. But I think in the immediate future, they're not working as that.
I think that, if I may clarify, those trees, and you remember that those trees that are along Quadrille right now on the west side, they were planted with a grant that we got from FDOT like probably 5 or 6 years ago. So the trees were planted big, but they still have not spread. So the trees are there, basically spaced every 30 feet along the entire corridor between Banyan and, I mean, the one where we didn't have constraints, probably around Gardenia. So, but the shade is not there yet. Right. And despite we have trees, the sidewalk is kind of, it feels like boring. So this is what the project comes in to try to add that additional component in there.
Yeah.
And may I add also that it was commissioned through the Art in Public Places program, which is there to enliven the streets, but with art.
And it's also like create a distinct experience that trees can do, something that people will be talking about. Oh, have you ever been to West Palm Beach? They have these.
And I
all these
think
things.
also maybe being clear about what happens when this project reaches its end. You know, do we have enough shade? Do we need to plant more trees? That kind of question.
And I can address that also. One of the other components added to this project is we're doing a full evaluation of the project. So we are working with a company that we worked with before that was actually brought in for the musical swings. And they are going to do a lot of community outreach and engagement and data collecting in order to see a lot of questions. Did it make it more walkable? Did it hit the goal of the project? How did users, were users just using it functionally? Were they enjoying it? Was it both? Did they engage? And so that component will also sort of inform the city on which way this project should lend itself.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lambert, you have a question?
I do. You brought up another question too, though, when you were talking. My first question was, how was the location selected? And it kind of ties into what you were talking about, Sabile, is we're going to ask all these questions. Do we have, we're going to ask these questions at the end and no, through the process?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have some goals of what we want this to
Sure.
accomplish besides, I love, of course, art in public places to, enliven the streets with art. So I
Yes.
didn't know if those goals were considered when we selected this location, if you could speak to that a
I
little
think the
bit.
bottom line is this location is so darn boring and so car-oriented and now train-oriented that we wanted to make sure people were comfortable walking along Quadrille. And I know when I walk from City Place, I'm always walking on the other side of the street because there's shade trees there. And this is a non-activated area, basically.
Mm-hmm. It creates kind of a dead spot in the neighborhood, and I could understand the desire to bring vitality to that, to create a cohesive whole with the activity happening in Brightline and the rest of the neighborhood. One thing that is nice is that by activating this side of the street, we're always designing for multiple levels of engagement. So, and onlookers are never to be under consider, because you'll have people who will, take part. They might let someone more proactive lead the way with an umbrella. Some people will start gliding more energetically, and people will start mingling perhaps. But there's also everyone who'll be watching the show. It becomes a kind of performance, and that can be appreciated from the other side of the street or from the same street. So I think there's a nice. I think it will have an impact in a wider area than just the location of the artwork.
I have a question about the color.
Yes.
I love I love purple. It's like my favorite color. But could we use the colors of the city logo on the umbrellas?
The primary, what was the driver for the color was not to be a color that is resonant of like circulation or traffic signs. The blue is very much like the sky. I wonder if it will pop as much.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were looking for poppy color.
That pops. Commissioner Schoaf, you had a question?
Thank you. Yes, I think as we look at this, to get something from a technical standpoint that's going to withstand hurricane code, you're looking at some significant things that we need to look at as far as infrastructure that's below the sidewalk, the
Yeah, we're
safety
that.
along
We're
the
on
street.
that. Yeah.
Okay, and so as we're doing that, if this does become more permanent, I mean, no matter what structure you put in there, it's going to have to be significant to hold a heavy umbrella. So if we could start to look at what those future uses are, because to meet those codes is going to be very expensive.
So right now,
Yes,
the design is meeting the hurricane code for Florida, it's 155, so it is meeting it right now. It inadvertently, we had to design it to meet the code.
Sure.
So even though it was temporary, there was just no way around it.
Sure.
And so it was just, you know what, hit all the check marks and then see what happens.
And I think my request is more along the lines of, understood, it needs to meet hurricane code. Can we start to look at what those future uses might be, because the expense is going to be significant to meet hurricane code. So if we're going to invest that amount of dollars, what else can we do beyond umbrellas?
Yeah. Can I be more specific? Maybe. Just because right now our brief was to have a temporary structure, and the current budget allows for instance, a very concrete example. Like right now, what we would do with the budget we have is that we'll need to build foundations, but we'll probably need to saw the holes at the end so that they won't be easily reusable, the foundations themselves. There's multiple things you can reuse. You can reuse the foundations, and we just leave the socket for any structures to be plugged in. And then we can also reuse the structure if we want. We can leave the structure there forever. But this needs to be engineered from the beginning. So there's a question also, like if you keep it, we'll need more funds for it to become permanent. I just want this to be clear, because with the current budget, we cannot necessarily afford for it to be permanent.
Okay, good, thank you. Sibilia, what's the next step?
The next steps we're getting really close to finalizing all the permitting with both FDOT and the city. As I said, we've been working very, very closely with all of them. And once we're at a point now where we go through the permitting process, and then it goes into fabrication, and then installation, and if the timeline that we're on stays on track, we install at the end of summer.
Okay, so does this have to come back to the commission for a face of the city?
It will, but you'll know so much more, and I won't
Yeah.
have to go into
So the question about permitting, right now we're looking at permitting as a temporary structure.
Yes, and both FDOT and the city are aware of that, because that's how we're looking at it right now.
Okay, all right. One more question, Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. I was just curious, and maybe we address this with the swings, but the safety aspect of, I can see, some kids and maybe some adults who are kids at heart wanting to glide down and hold on.
Spend too much time on Clematis Street.
Let's do Mary Poppins
Yeah, Mary Poppins is actually the seed inspiration. No, it's a railing. It's even more sturdy than a zip line. So there won't be no problem. It can withstand right now, I think, 500 pounds or something. So it's yeah.
And there's a universal joint. So these are all the questions all the engineers asked, and we addressed all of them.
Yeah.
Like, safety, unintended misuse. So we're like trying to hit everything, and I think we've
Yep.
pretty much addressed every concern on both sides.
Awesome.
It's always somebody gonna try to do something that we didn't think about.
even
What
wanna
happens
think about
somebody jumps and hangs,
you
so
know.
make it that they cannot really hold the umbrella, so they cannot hang from it, that they no more than two people can hang from the pole, that if you hit it, you are not gonna hurt yourself, all
and
those
the
type
pole
of
can only
things.
go so far, and you can see it, and
Yeah.
all these things.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good.
Looks beautiful.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank
This is
you.
an excellent presentation, and we're looking forward to seeing how this moves forward.
Yes, I think there's, just like swings, it's hard to convey the feeling of being on a gliding umbrella, but I'm looking forward to you all to try it.
All right, sounds great. Okay, we're going on to item number 2, commercial garbage, from umbrellas to garbage.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as exciting. It is, personally, but
To you it is, maybe. You love
exciting.
garbage. He does. He loves garbage. Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, we
Mr. Kelly,
passed out
can you get this
presentation-
done in about a half hour?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We passed out a presentation, you can follow along. But we're here today to talk about continuous improvement, commercial garbage optimization. And kind of what influenced me to want to give this presentation is we had a individual come to one of our commission meetings and was totally unaware of all the stuff that's happening, not just in commercial garbage, but I'm going to talk about other things that the city's doing a fantastic job in optimizing processes. So I just felt it was necessary to come. And you know, one thing we often don't do is really talk about things and communicate as well as we should. So that's thus the purpose of coming today and give you a presentation. I think most of you are aware that in 2016, there was a city conducted an audit. And we're going to cover those audit findings today and the opportunities that presented for us for improvements and better service to our customers ultimately. While that audit was going on, one really good thing that we did is we established a separate public works department. And why that was so good is because we ended up really putting emphasis in the field with a public works director, with a staff that concentrated on all the field activities. Before that, it was run from downtown. It was sometimes more of a secondary initiative. So that really helped us put focus on sanitation and streets. The city staff concurred with the findings. I don't think there was much of disagreement that we needed to make improvements. Around that same time, I'm an engineer. I saw a need. Let's hire an industrial engineer to lead this effort for improvement. And that has really proven to be a smart move here. Carlene McHenry was the engineer we hired, and she's going to be up next to talk about what she did. But basically, she established a cross-functional team, and she established a plan to optimize commercial garbage operations. Now, in the city, we've come to utilize some pretty advanced methodologies. They're based on Six Sigma, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about that in a minute. In order to optimize operations. I think something that's very important to know is that we've gone way beyond the audit recommendations with this project. And we've put
Gosh, I hope Mr. Levine is listening today.
well, I didn't want to mention this.
I'm just saying, I'm hoping he's listening today.
But, you know, not only have we come up with a new process, but we're putting systems in place to ensure that these are sustained. And I think that's critical. Oftentimes we make improvements and then it just kind of disappears. So, and you know, as I mentioned, we're using Six Sigma methodology. As I mentioned, I don't think people realize of what the city has been going through in order to become more sophisticated in our approach to problem solving. We use this advanced tools, and it's very heavily data driven. And for those of you all that aren't familiar with Six Sigma, it's a rigorous methodology, and it was developed by an engineer at Motorola in the 1980s. And its purpose is to drive defects out of either manufacturing processes or other processes. So what we're trying to do is trying to make the process more robust and less prone to errors. Here at the city, our projects are led by professionals that are Six Sigma certified. And you're going to hear from Carlene McHenry. She's a black belt. We also have Darren Hollyfield, who's the assistant utility director. He's also a black belt. And the way this is set up is that there's levels of certification all the way up to becoming a black belt, which takes about a year of training and actually doing real projects to be able to become certified. It starts off at white belt, goes to yellow belt, green belt, and then black belt. And it's very similar to martial arts. That's what they made it out. So we have 2 black belts. We also have roughly 20 green belts that we've trained, and we're training more. Now we're training a number of our supervisors in yellow belt training. So we're starting to really develop a whole cadre of folks to be able to do this. So now I'm going to introduce Carlene because she really knows about this project. She's an operations manager with public utilities, and she drove the process. So, Carlene?
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone. So this morning, I'd like to kind of focus in on the datas and the facts. So I'm going to talk about all of the steps we took to successfully complete this project, where we are today, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Scott Kelly, and he'll talk about what's next for this project. So as Mr. Scott Kelly indicated, Six Sigma methodology relies on five critical steps. And the original step, which is define, requires that the project team clearly define the project objectives and to ensure there's a clear path to understanding where we are, where we're not successful towards the end of the project. And so our gauge and our problem statement was clearly defined by the audit. That was not up for interpretation, personal interpretation. And what that meant is the auditor clearly defined that they wanted to see balanced and efficient routes. They also clearly defined that they wanted to see the department conduct some analysis to understand what are the critical resources that are needed, whether it's labor or vehicle or any outside resources that's needed to get the Public Works Department to where it needs to be to operate efficiently. They also indicated that they wanted to see some documented policies and procedures. Take a tight look at what are we doing today, what can we do better, and how do we get a little bit leaner at what we do. And so that established the baseline as to what we were going after for this project. It became very apparent that we needed to put together a very robust cross-functional teams. A lot of what we defined in this problem statement required close collaboration and partnership and working with cross-functional teams such as IT partners as we look at making processes better, which means integrating technologies, which means getting leaner, getting the right people in the room. What I've got up here is basically a cross-functional team that was developed. And these were very close partners that we worked with to get us to the improvement metrics that we're going to see in just a little bit. After the team was established, there's quite a bit of huddles that occurred during these Six Sigma huddles. And we wanted to create a plan that was very transparent. And so we created a master project plan. As the black belt on the project, we actually had 2 black belts, myself and Darren. We created a very robust plan that had key task items, clear deliverables, and measurable objectives. And so what you're looking at is and it also defined any risk that we faced, how we overcame those risks. The most important component that I wanted to call out on the project plan is transparency and accountability. Our success was critically dependent on those 2 things in order for us to get to where we are today. So we talked about define, now I'm going to talk about measure. And measure is important because that talks about what do we need to physically improve, which means it's the actual data collection. Six Sigma methodology is 100% data-driven. What does the data say? And it's the effective ability to collect it and thoroughly analyze it and dissect it in many, many different ways. And Scott indicated we used quite a bit of tools. We used Minitab, Companion, Access. We used many tools to dissect the data and look at it from very variable perspective and say, where are we at a loss? And what are the critical variables that are holding us up? But for this particular slide, from a data collection perspective, it became very apparent that we had a lot of work ahead of us. A lot of the data was sitting in card stocks. A lot of the operation was physical work order transferring. So the collection of the data that was needed to make an analysis was physically not there. So we had to react relatively quickly and secure some temp labor to help us transition all of the PDF cardstock information into electronic format that can be used in some way to interpret, to make a logical decision on which way we move. And so what that meant is development of some access databases. I developed a work order database in which we moved 100% documented workflow process into an actual database. That gave us a data trail that we can physically use to make some determination. Where do we sit with labor? What does our availability of our fleet look like? What is our cycle time? when we dispatch and return. So there's quite a bit of information that we needed to collect. What is our service time? What are our consumer bases? What are our customers? What are the assets that are tied to these customers? We had to establish an asset management program by labeling all the asset so that we can identify an asset to a customer, to a service type. So there was a lot of work ahead of us. We also established what are the key performance indicators that we're going after. And in the measure phase, we had to ensure that we created those databases to collect those, because that is the only way that we can actually say we've actually improved. And so the key performance indicators that we actually went after collecting and baselining is our cycle time. Cycle time is the time that a vehicle or truck is dispatched from the yard to the time that it returns to the yard. We also went after collecting service time. How long does it take to service a specific asset? And not only just an asset type. The complexity of balancing the routes means understanding how long a driver will be at each individual stop, and so we needed to understand what that looks like, and those metrics didn't exist, so we had to create those. Once we overcame that hump in ensuring that we've got the right data, we've got databases that are collecting the right data, and we know where we stood, it was now time to analyze the information and see, okay, what are the factors that will influence our success? And so we have the data, and we decided, let's go after a proof of concept. Do we really have what we think we have? Is there any other variables out there that we haven't thought of that will affect our ability to be successful from a routing perspective? So on the bottom right, notice I said Hurricane Irma, because Hurricane Irma is just a little thing called Hurricane Irma that kind of came and hit our way a little bit and disturbed the project momentum. But after in the course of months of January, we decided, well, let's now start going back into the routing project, and let's do a 6-week pilot and test our assumptions. That's really what a proof of concept is. During the 6-week pilot, the devil is in the detail is a statement that I like to use, and that's apparently what happened. There were quite a bit of variables, unforeseen variables, that we did not plan for and we did not see. And so those are the key benefits of a proof of concept, and that's what I've kind of laid out. There are access and road constraints that drivers are very familiar with, but those are not documented processes that you can measure across the city of West Palm Beach. And so it means there was an SME there that we missed, and that's our drivers. So our drivers had to become a critical SME in this process in order for it to be successful. We also looked at the integrity of the data that we were using. The output from our proof of concept indicated the data that were sitting in the card stock did not match billing information that we had on file. The route books that we had physically sitting as instructions for our drivers did not correlate with what was in the card stock. So we had quite a bit of a QA effort ahead of us that we had to overcome before we could ever consider putting any data inside of any type of a software to begin this type of a heavy lifting project. And so what it meant is a lot of what the drivers were doing on the road was purely 100% memory. It was purely 100% memory. And the dynamic change of customer requesting changes to their assets as well as service days, as you can imagine, that's a lot for a driver to memorize across 5,500 commercial assets. So we then just decided we've got a lot of work ahead of us. We don't really know what our service times are. We went after collecting those in those databases. Lock and load, we've got those. The constraints that we were faced with, there are specific customers that are within tight vicinities of each other. However, the request is, my gates aren't open till 10 o'clock. I'm happy that you're in my vicinity at 8, but you can't pick me up till 10. So we had what we call a conflict and goal, which means we have a goal to establish a tight connection network to decrease our collection. However, because the customer has a request and we're unable to access, those create some conflicts. So we had to piggyback off of neighboring routes and stuff. So it's not 100% optimized as you would think from a sequence perspective, but we knew we had to go after understanding what those constraints are by individual customers. We worked very closely with our supervisors that are sitting in the back across our sanitation supervisors to ensure that we had a standard route naming convention. For any routing software, there needs to be a naming convention that establishes geographical locations, service days, so that we could actually correlate those things. And so we defined all of those things to move forward in the process. So the proof of concept greatly helped us out for identifying what we call CTQs, critical qualities indexes. Once we overcame that hurdle, we were ecstatic to physically go on and have some fun and say, we're now ready to do some improvements. In the middle of this improvement, we were still in the RFQ process, trying to kind of overcome through that RFQ process. We then discovered that there is a tool that is called Hiperweb that is being used by utilities, and we like the idea of cross-functional tools. Since utilities currently manages the billing structures for most of our divisions here at the city, it made only business sense that we used a tool that was already on a platform that Public Works can kind of piggyback off of. So from that perspective, we were able to overcome the RFQ time constraints and kind of go straight into a let's establish whether or not we can actually jump on this contract. And that process took about 6 months. But in between those 6 months, the question we asked ourselves internally as leaders, do we have to wait 6 months? Or do we keep going with maybe something off the shelf or some analytical capability to optimize the routes? And we answered that question. We said, we're going to keep going. And so while the contracting perspective occurred between January and June, the core team determined we were going to go after balancing and optimizing these routes. And we secured a low off-the-shelf software that helped us with those capabilities. So what did that mean? Between January and June, we had quite a few hands from a temp labor perspective updating a lot of billing discrepancies. We had to go on a full force asset management program. So every single commercial asset today is labeled on the field. We had to pair customers with asset. There were some discrepancies in terms of which customer owned which asset, and as you can relate, that directly impacted billings. We redesigned process workflows in terms of ownerships. Where does a process begin? Where does the handoff occur? Where does the sign-off occur? And where does the QA to ensure that the full loop process closes? And what do I mean by that? Just by a quick example, there are work orders that we found that completed on the field, but the billing aspect never got transposed from a billing perspective. So we're picking up, but we're just not getting paid, in other words. And so there are some stop gaps and process improvements that happened in redefining processes to ensure that we had the right people. Some time ago, you also recall Peter Bena came to commissioners and asked for 2 key positions, and that was the operations analyst / fleet dispatcher position, as well as a fleet coordinator. Those were 2 critical components that we needed. That position assisted with ensuring that stopgap that we're talking about. There was a gap between what happened on the field and any information that was done in the office. And so that position was the glue to kind of connect the 2. And then in improved phase, we'll show you what those benefits are as a result of you blessing us with those positions. And that was the ACM for the operations analyst and dispatcher. And as we talked about, we went into full requesting legal to kind of help us out with gaining the Hyperweb asset management contract. By the way, Hyperweb is also in the room, and he's back there. From an improvement perspective, we have completely balanced all 7 commercial days. Right now, as we said, the actual benefits are what I'm going to go over, some of the soft and hard benefits. We've seen a 35% productivity efficiency gain for commercial, and that's specifically for just routing. That estimated actual benefit is around somewhere $182,000 a year. And it's important to know, with the sustainability of these efforts, it means a recurring $182,000 every year, compounding. It also goes to say that we've seen some fuel benefits as well. We've worked with our fleet department fairly closely, and they've been helping us with gathering metrics as it returns to diesel fuel consumption. We've seen a reduction of 1,500 gallons per month. That's another $52,000 in the bank for some efficiency gains for commercial route optimizations. And these are actual benefits. From a QA effort for the position that we've asked the commissioners for a few months ago, and that's QAing of all of our card stock information, ensuring that we've labeled assets, ensuring that the billing correlates with the services that the customers have requested. And more importantly, where this became important is that when the commercial drivers arrive at a location site, the asset management directly directs them to specifically which asset they're collecting. In the previous state, we instruct them to go to a job site, but if there's 10 assets, they have no idea which asset they're collecting, so guess what? We're collecting all 10. And a customer can only be paying for just 2. Now we're giving them clear instructions specifically to an asset, and we're directing them specifically to the right asset. So the benefits of this QA was roughly $99,000 to get a lot of the findings. Do we think there's more opportunities from a QAing? Absolutely. I don't think there's 100%. This is 100% of, I wouldn't say our records are 100%, but I'd say we're somewhere in the vicinity of 95%. They've gone fairly quickly to try to retrieve this. The QA effort had to happen relatively quickly because no balancing effort can begin until you have relatively good data. And so because it was a predecessor, that's why it had to go relatively quickly. And they're continuing to do that as we speak. We also identified during the QA process, there is a specific customer type that was never defined for the Department of Public Works. And those were customers that were using city assets in the city right-of-way. And we called those customers share city managed assets. And that's the customers that we actually went after defining this past fiscal year. So there are dumpsters and compactors that are in the city right-of-way where customers that does not necessarily have a placement for dumpsters of their own and are using city property. So we established those customers, we established a rate structure for those customers, and that rate structure is specifically determined on their generation rates, how much trash they generate based on the business type that they are. And we did not affect at all the per cubic yard rate for commercial. So rates did not change. We just simply went after a rate structure that fairly and equitably, and it's defensible to charge those specific customer types. And we defined them because they were not defined before. And so that's not up for guessing what their billing rate would be. It's defined. And so the benefits of that is $413,000. The auditors also requested that we take a look at our weights for our vehicles. They requested that we evaluate solutions such as scales for trucks. The department was receiving some DOT tickets, but more importantly, aside from just the DOT tickets, because the amount was quite minimal compared to the other cost factors that we were looking at, is really the safety issue. Overweight trucks means potential brake failures, means potential truck flipping over, means safety for our public, you know, and for our driver issues. So it was very important for us while we were under the procurement phases of trying to get the scales, and we've tested a few, and we're still undergoing that. There's a few that's been installed in about 2 trucks, but we don't necessarily feel comfortable with the performance of those scales, and so we're evaluating some additional options. We use some analytics because the beauty of developing the databases and the beauty of data is we now have data to suggest how much weight per cubic yard we're collecting. And so now it was easy for us to kind of gauge where a driver should go to landfill. So we started using those analytics and those tools to determine when should a driver, not leave it up to the driver to feel or guess when he's going to landfill. So we've reduced the probability of an overweight truck, which as a result, we're happy to report, since September of 2018, we have not seen a single DOT ticket violation citation. So the big win here is not only just the fact that we have not seen any citations since September for commercial, is really the safety aspect. That's the biggest win for us. So all in all, I've touched on the bigger wins. There obviously was quite a bit, and we're a little bit short on time, but overall, the big ones that I've touched on sum up to somewhere around the vicinity of $758,000 for Department of Public Works. More importantly, for any Six Sigma methodology project is the control phase. We've gotten here, but how do we stay here? And so the control aspect of here is ensuring the sustainability of the improvements, even after I've moved on to another project, or I don't think you're going to go anywhere, but even after you go anywhere, is to ensure that the department can kind of sustain the efforts that's been placed. And so that's where Hyperweb comes into place. Hyperweb is a real-time GPS tracking system. What we've done is we've balanced the route, and we've used the drivers as our gauge. Every driver has been part of this process. Every supervisor has been part of this process. And so what it means is we've locked in place a file that says, I'm not only optimized by how quickly I can get from one location to the next, but I'm optimized based on constraints from the customers and based on constraints from access, street access, and more importantly, from a safety perspective for the driver. And so we're loading that into Hyperweb, and we're letting Hyperweb develop those KPIs and track the cycle times, which means the time of departure, time arrival at landfill, wait times at landfills, service times at the customers, because we've baselined it and we know where it should be. And anytime we're outside of tolerance, Hyperweb will alert us. It alerts supervisors, it alerts the superintendent, and more important, Pete, so that he has a higher visibility of what's happening in public works. And that's the beauty of having a control mechanism. So we've gotten here, now it's time to keep us here. Great. And that's the beauty of it. So there's a lot of other functionalities. There's quite a bit, and I don't want to.
Yeah, I want to save a little time for questions and answers. So unless there's something that you absolutely need to attend to at this point. All right, questions for. Thank you, Curleen. That was outstanding. Oh my goodness. I think we're all, got a lot of information in our head right now, and that we're going to have to sort through.
The only thing I'd like to do is introduce the folks that participate in the project. So let me quickly do that. IT was critical, so we had Nathan Kerr and his group, public utilities, customer care. Of course, without Pete and his crew, including Leon, Erica's here, and all the supervisors, I want to make sure they came because I really wanted them to be recognized. So.
Good job.
But it was really a cross-functional team, fleet, safety, public outreach, legal, everybody worked together very effectively. So I just want to take a minute to do that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, questions? Commissioner Neering.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. McHenry. Thank you for that presentation. This is, I believe that this is, like a case study from when you look at the genesis of this to come through our audit department, and I think our director is in the room. Oh, there she is. And to be, where we are today and hearing this information is really great, and it's a data-driven process. And I don't know if you're prepared to answer this part, but first of all, I think it's phenomenal, the efficiencies, the benefits to the city, to our residents, the money that we've saved. Could you talk a little bit about how the men and women who are actually in the trenches, who are doing this work, how they have benefited either from these efficiencies or maybe, Mayor, as we're saving dollars, is there a long-term plan to reinvest that into our folks who are doing the work, our employees who are actually making this happen? Again, that's a loaded question. I don't know that you came prepared to answer it, but I think it's an important one.
In terms of reinvestment, I'll leave that to Peter Beamick to kind of answer. But in terms of the drivers, better work-life balance. We've had drivers on the road for 12 to 14 hours, hot days. So this means we've efficiently balanced these routes where the drivers now can have a little bit of time to kind of rest and kind of come home. And that's what we're hoping to kind of do with residential, which is our next one, and then we're moving on to bulk yard in the next few weeks. And we're moving relatively quickly with them because we've already actually piloted just one. So that's what it means for the drivers. And I don't know if, Leon, you want to add anything to that, but okay.
Here, I can add some.
Leon.
It was Leon.
No,
It's pretty frustrating because, they didn't have the equipment when they needed it. They would go out, their truck wouldn't start, or there would be some kind of issue. They were running long hours, a lot of overtime. We've cut 80% of the overtime on these routes. I mean, that's significant. And so now they end up being able to go home on time. I mean, that's, I think, one of the most beneficial things. But also, they have the tools that they can do their job more effectively. They don't end up having to come and ask someone all the time what to do on their job. They're going to have the tools at their fingertips.
Great. Other questions? Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. I wanted to give you all a standing ovation. I think this is tremendous. I agree with Commissioner Neering that started with the audit process. Everything that you all have done, including data, technology, has really been tremendous, and I hope that we continue to use the same process in other areas. My question is about, you mentioned 758 annual total savings. I'm sure we invested some to be able to get that, but I don't know if I missed that, or was that included on there?
So the original budget for the routing software was about $100,000. We secured Hiperweb for $75,000. The recurring monthly fee, since utilities is already using Hyperweb, we just kind of piggybacked off of that. So that was a huge benefit for us. We did go after looking at other softwares. The integration of those softwares, to be able to integrate them, would be a little bit more difficult. And because we were using Hyperweb, and Hyperweb is already on a platform with utilities, and utilities is who's actually managing public works billing structure, it only made better business sense to do that. So, yeah.
So then maybe the only other investment was our time in being strategic about this process.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Mayor,
Well, and Carleen herself was brought on to work on this, and so, of course, her salary, and, the other folks involved, but it's certainly been worth it.
Yeah, for sure. Is Carleen, I don't know, is her role always doing these kinds of projects, or how do we get more of her?
Okay, well, she did a great job on this. So the reward is you get other projects, okay? So Carleen has moved on, and we're in the heat of a right-of-way permit improvement process, which is cycle time, cost, and also safety, because what we're, when you have to do locates when you go out and work in the right-of-way, and they have to be done effectively and timely, and you want to make sure the permits are done in a timely manner so that we cover ourselves. So she's doing that right now. We're also, Jeff and I are working on a project management process, which I think is really going to be helpful in making sure that we undertake projects in a systematic way, an inclusive way.
I think over the last probably 3-4 years, we've really been focusing more on data. So every other week we have City Stat, where each department comes in and reviews their KPIs with us, talks to us, shows us their data. Jeff, Dora, Scott, myself, a couple of other people, and talks about how they're doing and how they're getting their work done. So, and then with the open data portal that we just launched, and I work with What Works Cities. So we're really trying to focus more on understanding our work through data and improving our work through data. Awesome. We just met with each of the department directors and asked them to look at the data they're currently collecting and reporting and determine what works, what's not works. Because I don't want you to collect data just to collect data. We want them to collect data that's going to inform their practice. And so we've been tweaking some of it as we go along. Tricia Schoaf?
Thank you. I just want to be the last one to say congratulations on a great job to all of you. You've put in a lot of work here. I'm just interested to know the path forward to make sure that this is maintained and staying on track. Is that majority through the software application? Are there other positions that are needed to do the upkeep and maintenance of this process?
No, there's no other positions needed. It's the training that's required, which we're undertaking. Yeah. It's the software, it's the processes in place that are robust enough that will survive through this. So we have to sustain this, or else it wasn't a worthwhile effort. So yeah, we have those. That's one of the most important parts of the project. Sure. Before I forget, I didn't introduce Matt, who's taken Carlene's place out in Public Works. So yeah,
welcome, Matt.
It'll be tough to follow Carlene on this one.
So we are working to help people get Six Sigma training, and it's not easy.
We're going to have a Greenbelt class. If anyone would like to take Greenbelt, it's only about a 6-month commitment.
And it's hard work.
And a lot of it on your own time. So that's why I'm so excited about all these people.
Okay. Anything else on this topic?
Can I?
Yes.
I just, before we left, I wanted to weigh in because this kind of started based on a comment that came out of one of the meetings about audit comments. And I just want to use this as an example of why this process worked and reiterate what Scott said. The whole purpose of the audit process is to identify areas. The auditor comes in, looks at an area, makes recommendations, and then it's our job to implement them. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. This was a process that I was very, very proud of. I thought it went really, really well. As Scott mentioned, we are in the process of looking at doing this for other functions as well, and I think you're going to be very pleased. The only other thing that I would mention is, as the mayor said, we've been meeting with the directors and talking about creating KPIs. We're going to put that out so that the community can see that, so that you can see that, so that you can get feedback on what's working well and what's
it's
not.
on a website now, and we'll be continuously updating it and changing it and making sure. But I think one of the things I wanted to say, and I'm happy that our auditors are not, they're not in the audit business to get anyone. They're in the audit business to improve. And I think this is a good example. And I think it's unfortunate when outside people use it as a gotcha, because that's not what it's all about. We're focused on improving what we do here, and that's a helpful step. So, okay, thank you. Good job, as always. Penny, are you? Penny? No, Penny? We had a tree overview.
She wanted to move that out. That was taken off the agenda.
Well,
Sorry.
all right. I thought she was on, and I sent Armando away because I asked him to come and do a presentation on some of the homeless things that have happened and update. So that was going to be my Mayor's Matters, but I thought we were going to be here for a while longer. Anything else? We'll have Armando come back.
Sounds good.
All right.
I want you to say my thanks to everyone.
Sure.
So
quickly.
I'll be really quick. I can't tell which
You can just stand there and say thank you.
there. Okay. right
No,
there.
sorry.
By the podium. Thank you. And I agree with what everyone has said, and I think it's a great opportunity I want to specifically thank the supervisors that I got a chance to work with, because it is difficult when someone comes in and then all of a sudden they're unearthing everything, and they're sitting and they're getting into the trucks with you and watching everything you do. But I really appreciate the time that they took to spend with me. I appreciate Pete coming in when we just started, and to come in and to deal with me personally. I really appreciate to be able to work with you. Carlene has been amazing. I didn't get to work with Carlene when we were actually doing the audit, but it seems like she's been doing a really, really good job. And I want you guys to all know that this is what we anticipate for audit as we go on. And I know we have other department heads who are doing the same thing that started with Pete and taking those recommendations and running with them. So to the extent that you have a chance to thank each of them, I'm so glad that you guys are here. I would like to thank you guys for giving us the opportunity and trusting us to work with you on audits.
Thank you, thank you.
I just have a question for you, Mayor. You mentioned when we started this conversation, there's some folks who would like to make sure get this information. Is there anything that we could do to use this as a test case?
Open up their brain and pour it in. I'm sure that, we can put things out in our newsletter, and maybe Tony will write a really nice article about it. Right, Tony? Yeah, it's, we do so much to get the information out, and people don't always receive it, so. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Sure.